Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle, powered by PGC Basketball. We believe in the value of a coach. We're here to educate, empower, and encourage you to lead like never before. This week, TJ and Sam discuss where trash talk fits into the game of basketball. Is it about the team, the player, or the opponent? They discuss how coaches can help players navigate today's culture and competitive environment and keep everyone focused on the team. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Hardwood Hustle. We're going to talk today about, TJ, a topic that came to the forefront during the Iowa LSU women's championship game. The controversy around, I guess you could use controversy around Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. What's acceptable in trash talk? What isn't acceptable? What's fair game? What's not fair game? What's classy? What's classless? There's a lot of different ways we're going to go with it. Why don't you share, TJ, just your opening thoughts on the situation? Before you go, let me just paint the picture, though, for those that don't know what we're talking about. And so Angel Reese got a lot of flack on social media after the game because she was doing the Caitlin Clark kind of wave the hand in the face and pointing to her ring finger when they won, signifying putting a ring on her finger. So some people took exception to that. And then some people took exception to them taking exception. But what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think she caught a lot of flack. I think it went both ways. I think she caught a lot of support too, on social media, reading all the different things about what people thought and their opinions on it. And it's so interesting because here's my initial overriding thoughts. One is it's a slippery slope. And then two is I think many times in this current situation we're in, people just really go hard in on one or the other. Like you're either Angel Reese did right or she did wrong. It can't be anywhere in between. I think the same thing happens in politics and everything else, not to get too political, but I've said this before, and I had this talk with my team as we were talking through different current event situations and whatever. Like you can dislike Donald Trump and think he's not a good person and you don't like his behavior, but like his policies. Like two things can be true. Same thing. You could dislike Joe Biden and think he's whatever and still like his policies. But in the polarizing world that we live in, it doesn't seem that you can actually do both. It's either you're all in and Donald Trump's the greatest thing or Joe Biden's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and so are their policies. And I'm not in that camp. I think that, multiple things can exist. And so, first of all, I was excited to see the women's game get so much love. I think it was almost 10 million viewers or something like that. And that was awesome. Like it deserves that. And it was so exciting to see that. First and foremost, that was a good thing for basketball. Second, when it goes to this particular controversy, and I think it happens in the guys' game all the time. And when I say it's a slippery slope, back to point number one, is it's just like kind of what it's doing to our game. It has nothing to do with either Caitlin or Angel Reese. Like it's all across basketball. You see this where Bev Reeves was telling LeBron he's too small, and then Reeves came back at him, he's too small. And guys, look, you and I coached some travel basketball, and I go watch some of these games, we're recruiting or whatever, and it's like somebody gets a layup and they're flexing like every time. It's just like it's almost become such a part of the game. And you could see the trickle down effect to the lower levels of basketball. And I don't think that is good. We can talk specific about the situation and we will, and some feelings we have about that. But the thing that concerns me more than what happened in that moment of whether it was good judgment or bad judgment, whatever side you land on, is more about what actually is going on in the game of basketball and what are players learning. Basketball was created. If you actually go back to the initial statement of why James Naismith created it, it's a pretty interesting concept of why he created it. It was for a lot of goodness. And I think there's some parts of it that are getting far from that. I think there's parts of it that are, it's becoming so much of a show that are we taking the best lessons basketball has to offer and putting those into our young people? And that's where I think the slippery slope is look, have I trash talk? Yes. Have we all trash talk? Probably so. Gets a little bit hot, gets a little bit heated. People go back and forth. I think that's part of the game. I get all of that. I have no problem, no issues with any of that. But I do think that when every play requires a flex, or every play requires a tap into the chest, or you're too small, or hand in face, or whatever, that's the part that concerns me more, not nearly as much as what happened in that one incident with those players, because I think we're really picking out one out of a million plays that happened in college basketball this year and making a really, really big deal about it, when it's happened, like I said, a million times. And I think that's more concerning to me, is the totality of it rather than just the individual situation.
So, TJ, one of the great things to me about basketball is competitiveness of it, the competition that you alluded to. And when you compete at the highest of levels, which we saw Iowa and LSU do in front of the largest audience ever on the national stage, it requires Caitlin Clark plays with an edge to her. Angel Reese plays with an edge to her. Going up a level, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Diana Taurasi, they have an edge. That is partly what makes them great at what they do. And when you take yourself into that state of being, that state of mind of how you compete, certain things are going to come out of it. It's like trash talk, like playing with a chip on your shoulder. And it was evident Angel Reese was playing with a chip on her shoulder. And that's great. I think it's a good thing. I think, people are critical of her. There was a racial probably and a gender component. I think you alluded to the gender piece. Like, we're not used to maybe seeing women, express themselves in a bold way like that. I think that's probably a fair statement. I do watch women's basketball, not as much as I might watch men's, but I think there's that element. And then I think where some people had some issue is like, wait, Caitlin Clark did the exact same thing with the hand over the face. And when she did it, it was competing. When Angel Reese did it, some people called it classless. And then that's a double standard, right? And then maybe the last element to it that I think is interesting discussion, I do want to talk about the self-celebration of every play, the ordinary play that we self-celebrate. But I think the last piece to it is it appropriate, TJ, to talk trash in the heat of the moment or after the game? Is it okay to talk trash then? I think that's where some people are like, wait, Angel Reese, you won. Why are you still doing this? The game was over. Like, celebrate with your team. And, that's an interesting discussion. Like, I do think talking trash in the heat of competitions, oh, man, that's fair game. And then after the game, there's an element that I think all competitors, you want to see people go up and shake hands. You see these UFC fighters try to kill each other and then they'll hug it out afterwards. There's an element to, like, when the competition's over, hey, let's show our respects. And I think they both did, maybe in press conferences after, but those are some additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think they both did show respect after the fact, and there's a good point there. I think part of the reason that Angel Reese's one probably rubbed people more wrong is that it did happen after the game, and I think what we would love for our athletes to think or know is like, hey, you did your talking, like you won the national championship. Nothing else is needed, and she's not the first one to do this after winning a game. She's not going to be the last one to do it after the game. But I think that was an element of what people were talking about and why they were fired up is it went for a while and it was after the game, right? So do I love that? No. I don't know what all she was thinking or what she was feeling or all the things that go into that. And so not the biggest fan of it because it lasted kind of long and because it was after the fact. I think that, the losing team's probably already heard enough. You already did enough talking. Your play and your team's play showed up and led you to a national championship. There's really nothing else to say. Like, you have done what you need to do. And so then it seems excessive, right? And I think, the back and forth in a game seems like the heat of the battle. Don't always love that too. I mean, I love players that just kind of keep their mouth shut and go get work done and go find a way to win, and they let their playing do the talk. And so that would be my word to my team, hey, don't mess around with that stuff. Just lock into what we got to do. Either we're good enough or we're not good enough. That talking's not going to help us win or lose. I understand at some points maybe standing up for yourself or firing back at somebody or whatever that might be. But look, anytime you got to put attention to that stuff, you're taken away from your actual team and the focus of your job, whatever it is that night. So in the big scheme of things, I think it's small. In the big picture of all of the things combined, I think it's big as far as what's going on in our game. And so, we isolate and we talk about this one situation, like I said before, but there are so many examples. We're picking on this one, maybe because it's the first time that 10 million people tuned in. It was the biggest stage they've ever been on, and it's becoming a bigger deal. Maybe that's why. Maybe there's a racial component to it. Maybe all of those things factor in. So I do think it's been overblown. Like, I think too big a deal has been made of it. But I also think too small of a deal has been made about what's actually going on in the game. Like, as far as all the time, it reminds me of like the NFL a little bit. We've gone back and forth, and the celebrations became so excessive that they then made it a penalty. Now they're kind of back to letting them celebrate a little bit with rules. Like, they're trying to find what is okay. What's okay to allow players to express themselves without being disrespectful. I think the NFL has been trying to toe that line and figure that out, as do I think eventually basketball will be too. Like, hey, what is taking away from the game? What's adding to the game? What's too much? What's not enough?
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what's the right balance, what's black and white, what's gray with self-celebration versus can we build the tallest building on the street without tearing down the other tall building? And I think a lot of times we think, or players today, I think they have to be boastful in their often ordinary play and putting down the too small or the talking trash. It's okay to make a play and go back and get a fist bump or point to the passer. TJ, I see this, I don't know how much you pay attention, but in Major League Baseball, over the last couple of years, they've really allowed and promoted players to celebrate when they hit a home run. And they go, like, baseball used to police itself where if a player showed up the pitcher, then somebody was going to get hit. And that still happens in today's game. Or, in basketball, if a player went down the lane and dunked on somebody, the next time down the lane, they were going to get put on the floor. I was watching the documentary with the 80s Celtics Lakers where dudes were just getting knocked to the floor left and right. I don't know that that's the game of basketball, and maybe I'm going down too far of a side road, but we do at the professional level, it's an entertainment business. And so the people running that business, they allow that to happen because I think it brings more attention to it. At the youth and developmental levels that you and I are at sometimes out of the year, like, I think we have a duty as coaches to teach players, how to celebrate. I think we have to teach them that.
Yeah. There's some pretty crazy videos out there right now of third and fourth and fifth graders, flexing on people,
Dancing,
all this dancing. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty out there as far as it, and what's funny is I don't even actually think the individual player is like, oh, I want to show up my opponent. I actually just think they're modeling what they're seeing. And it's become like, at the heart of it, it's not even let me flex because I want to show up my opponent. They're just flexing because it's become normal. Like, everyone's doing it. The NBA players started doing it and it just trickled on down. And now it becomes this thing. I actually don't even think when the trash talking happens, I don't even think they're as mad as I was as a player. Like, when I trash talked as a player, it was usually something happened. It went back and forth. It was this fiery instance where two players were getting at each other that the competitiveness almost went overboard or spilled out a little bit. Now I just think they're just doing it to do it. Like, I think they're just trash talking because it's cool. They're just trash talking because that's what everybody else is doing. Occasionally it's because it's heated, but a lot of times I don't even think it's fueled from competitiveness. I think it's just fueled from that's the norm now.
Well, trash talking's been a part of this is not a new thing. So I think a part of the trash talk conversation, here's two pieces I want to get your thoughts on. Is trash talking after the game an acceptable thing? What is acceptable? What's not? And then like how much, when somebody makes an ordinary play, is it acceptable to talk trash? I mean, I don't know. It gets very subjective and judgmental. Like, what's the appropriate when Larry Bird walks in the locker room in the 1980s, the 3-point contest and the famous, I don't know if you remember this, but he walks in, he goes, "Who's getting second?" Like he's talking, he's like, "I'm gonna win. Which one of y'all?" And then I think Damian Lillard, I think Phil, who we've had on our Hardwood Hustle, I think Phil told Damian Lillard that, and maybe he even did it this past year. Like, it's the same thing. It's just 40 years difference. Like, I don't know. Trash talk to me is just a part of the game. I think there is like some context to it all. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the funniest part about it to me is like, I think the trash talk from like Larry Bird or Dame Lillard or whatever, like, I think it's seriously fueled from a place of just intense competitiveness. Whether
Yeah.
that's, like, are they too competitive? Are they whatever? I mean, I remember I've told you this story and I've said it several times, but Dominique Wilkins, having lunch with him one time, and he said, talking about Michael Jordan, he's like, honestly, the only word I can use to describe him is evil. Like, we would go play golf or go out to eat, and then we'd go to the tip off at center circle, and he would just look at me like he never seen me in his entire life, and he just looked evil. Like, I really feel like guys like Larry Bird, maybe Dame Lillard, I don't know him, Michael Jordan, like, they just had such an intense desire to win. Like, I mean, to me, in recruiting, that is harder and harder to find every year. And I know that sounds like I'm getting old. I totally get that, because I think the game has morphed a little bit. And here's the biggest reason it's morphed. I think the NBA has done a phenomenal job of building stars within the game. They've individualized, and part of like selling your product. I mean, even a guy like Steph Curry, who most of us, we don't know him, but most of us would deem, oh, he's a good guy, he's whatever. There's antics to his game. There's stuff that he does in celebrations and stuff like that. So
Yep.
nobody's, but for a different reason. I think part of that's just like the celebration of the game and building your brand and doing all that. Like, I think the last thing Larry Bird was thinking about was building his brand. I think he was only thinking about crushing you. Michael Jordan was only thinking about crushing you. I don't think that was the biggest thing on their mind. Whereas today, I do think sometimes it's build my brand, or on a lower level, help me to stand out, help me to get recognized, help me to do whatever. And so the place it's coming from is not necessarily always a place of competitiveness where I see it. And it may have been, Angel Reese may have been wanting to win so bad, and Caitlin Clark, both of them do the whole hand over the face. That might have been straight from competitiveness, right? But when we're talking about the majority of stuff that's happening out there, I don't know that it's being sourced from competitiveness. I think it's being sourced from a part of, look at me.
That's a really good point. You bring up the Steph Curry thing, and you're right. Like, Steph is having a lot of fun out on the basketball court. He's shooting a shot, and then he's shimmying his shoulders. He's shooting a shot, turning around, TJ, to the bench. Like, you've seen him where he shoots it, and he'll turn around before the ball's even gone in. There's a level of showmanship. There's a level of trash talk where he doesn't even say a word, but he's talking trash. Like, you can call it whatever, but that's talking trash, right? And like, but we sometimes accept Steph Curry because he's a man of faith, because he's a family man, because we think he represents a lot of good things, and so we say, "Oh, that's Steph having fun." And then if Russell Westbrook does it, and he mean mugs somebody, is Russell Westbrook going down the lane and dunking on a guy and then mean mugging him or flexing? Is that worse than Steph Curry hitting his third straight three and running down the court doing a dance? Like, you bring up that point. I think that's a really interesting comment. Is that different than Angel Reese pointing to her ring finger? I don't know. They're all in the same bucket.
Well, it is, but the line has become so blurred, so like, I have a guy that played for us, was probably the most fun guy I've ever coached. He's still playing professional over in Taiwan. And I mean, he would hit a three and he had some antics to him, but it was almost always at our bench. Like, he would come by and like get the guys and everyone would get fired up. And The opponent may have sometimes seen that as showmanship. I knew him. He was genuinely having fun out there. He was genuinely wanting to enjoy it with his teammates. And it looked, I mean, maybe that we would equate what Steph is doing too, you know? The difference to me oftentimes is who it's directed at, on whether it's appropriate or not, you know? Is it directed? It really can be directed in one of three places. It can be directed at my team, like join in the fun with me.
Mm-hmm.
It can be directed at the opponent, which is like, screw you, right? Or it can be directed at the individual themselves, like, do you see me, right? Like one of those three places. And it's hard to differentiate and separate all those. I actually love the one that's like, with my team, do you see me? We're having fun. I actually love that one, but it can sometimes be seen as being showmanship or showing somebody up, right? I'm not a real big fan of the one that says, look at me, which is basically I made a layup and I'm flexing, like the whole I'm the man. Like, I don't like that one at all. Then there's the third one, which is at the opponent, which most of the time crosses the line, but that's also where we get into the whole trash talk thing, where it's like, you made a bucket, I made a bucket, we're competing. That's the one where sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't like it. But, that's a really slippery slope. And when it crosses over to don't like, to do like, that's the one that kind of gets messy, I think.
I think that breakdown is pretty good. The three different distinction on how you celebrate. I think context matters too. Like, here's where I probably, my own bias and problem with a player would be like, this player isn't playing very hard. They're not really having an impact on the game, maybe either or, right? And they go down the lane and they get an and one finish, and then they flex on the defender, but they haven't really done anything all game, and now they're going to show up the opponent.
And they may not have done anything in the weight room either. When I see some of these people flexing, I'm like, what are you flexing? There's nothing there.
Right. Or, are they flexing toward their teammate, to your point? And maybe it's an energizing play. It's a momentum play that elevates because you're right. When you celebrate and play with emotion, and that emotion is towards your teammates, that's a real thing in basketball and in competition, right? Momentum is a real thing, and there can be momentum changing plays. And so there's value in celebrating with your team. But to your point, I mean, you and I probably align on like a little bit, probably old school approach, like, hey, go make the play and not be a robot. We're not saying be a robot and play emotionless. Like, go make a play and then go back on defense, or make a play on defense and go down and do your job on offense. Like, just act like you've been there before. The player who runs and gets the touchdown, do they do a 20-second celebration in the end zone, or do they hand the ball to the ref and they go celebrate with their offensive lineman? Could they do both? Yeah, I think they could do both too, right? I think context matters as well in this, and it is probably lastly not lastly on this point, is like, it's a preferential thing. Like, what do you prefer? Like, we all have different preferences.
Yeah, I would love, well, let me tie it back into this. What's our role as coaches, right? Yeah. Like, what's our role as coaches in this? And, my dad used to always say to me, don't give quarter, don't ask quarter, which is basically like, look, don't ask for anything from your opponent, don't whatever, but you're not giving back anything. I mean, just go compete, just go play hard. Like, that's what the game is.
You said quarter? Sorry.
Yeah. And I think, like, just really just not give anything back, not receive anything back. Just go compete. Like, that's why we do this. We go as a team to compete, to see what we can do. And I would love for it just to stay between those lines. And I also am in favor of players having fun while they do it. Like, I'm all about that. I think that would be great. I'm not a big fan of all the other stuff, the self-celebration, the, things that go into it. I also understand that, generations change, people are different. Like, maybe that's their way of having fun. I think that the best thing that we can do as a coach is ask the reason behind it. You know what I mean? Like, a particular celebration. Why are you doing that celebration? I had one player that would make a three And this is where it can get really messy. And he would blow a kiss after he made a three, his first three of the game. And he was actually blowing that to somebody that he lost. But the other team often thought he was blowing kisses at them. Right. And so it's just like all of that stuff just gets so messy, and it actually just takes away from the game and the competing of the game. And I think it's just hard to police. And I think just constantly asking players and trying to teach them, respect for their opponent, respect for the game, I think is really, really important, because I think it's a big
respect. Sorry, and respect for your teammates.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's kind of a big deal. I don't know what your thoughts are. Like when a player hits a three and is doing the three to the head, and all they did, TJ, was catch and shoot, but their teammate drew two defenders, maybe three, collapsed the defense and gave them a great look, and there's no acknowledgement to the teammate who assisted them. All they had to do was catch and shoot, and you're running down the court like you did everything. Yeah, you hit a shot, like good for you. Like I think that can like tear apart culture slowly, even though it's like a widely accepted thing. I think the team that points the passer instead of pointing three fingers ahead, I do think there's probably a big difference in those two teams.
Well, I think it's wildly out of control. I mean, the funny analogy you give, the three fingers to the head, like that's when my daughter hit her first three in middle school basketball, that's exactly what she did. And her coach was so mad. You had the varsity coach up in the stands was laughing because I think he just knew, it's like sixth grade girl, like whatever. The coach was mad because didn't want him showing off or doing whatever. And then when I asked her, she's got no context. She's been watching some YouTube videos of kids doing this. And so she's like, yeah, I just do the three to the head. Like, it's like, that's how out of control it's gotten. It's like, that was just normal to her. Like she's just been watching YouTube videos and thought, yeah, everybody celebrates a three. Everybody does that, and then you got to go into this conversation. Well, here's what it actually means. Here's why you don't want to do it, and even as a joke, before games, I mean, she'll ask me, hey, can I flex on somebody? I'm like, no, we're not flexing on people. You're a seventh grade girl. You're not flexing on people. But the idea that she's just even asking those questions, joking about it, or put three to the head, like I know she doesn't know what she's doing or talking about. She's just seen it. And she's just modeling it because she's been watching basketball videos.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, look, we all I remember being out in the driveway. I spent so much time out in the driveway, doing a countdown and trying my favorite player. Like I love Dominique Wilkins. Growing up in Atlanta, I watched the Hawks, so I would go out and work on Dominique's moves. So if Dominique was back in the day in the 80s and 90s, like if he was probably doing three fingers to the head, guess what I would have done? Three fingers to the head. Like I was mimicking what he did because that was my guy. So I think you bring up a good point. Like young players really, we got to know why they're doing what they're doing. And sometimes they're just doing it not to show up anybody, but they're just doing it to do it.
Yeah. And, I'm in big favor of helping players to understand what they're doing means. Mm-hmm. And then to make the choice whether they think that's right or wrong. I think it's part of growing people up and saying, hey, listen, do you want to be a player of respect? Do you want to be respected because of your game and give respect back to somebody? Or do you want to be respected for your trash talk? Do you want to be respected for, I think that's just putting that into context for them, because I actually think most kids prefer to be respected for their game. Most kids prefer to respect their opponent because of their game. But they've grown up in a different norm. They're seeing a different example. And so what they're thinking is that is okay. That is normal. And I think sometimes we have to point out to them or ask questions that lead them to making better decisions, to understanding like, gosh, if I could just play the game this way and respect my opponent, respect myself, whatever, I'm just going to gain more from the experience and I'm going to be a better person. My basketball lessons are going to carry over to my life lessons. But we do have to work to teach them those, because from like my daughter's example, like it's not like I had to teach her what to do after she scored. She already had figured it out on YouTube right now. So now I got to go unteach that a little bit on like why you're actually doing what you're doing. And so we as coaches definitely have our hands full in trying to tie together, how what a great competitor looks like. That's how I would sum it up. What does a great competitor look like? one that respects their opponents. Like we've seen this throughout history, and we still do a lot of times. And there's still a lot of great competitors out there that after a game give somebody a high five, celebrate them on a call or whatever. There's still a lot of great competitors out there. I think that we're just kind of really going down a little bit of a slippery slope with some blurred lines right now on what good competitiveness looks like.
Two things can be true. You can be a great competitor, talk trash, play with a chip and an edge on your shoulder, and respect your opponent, and respect the game, and give credit to your teammates. All that can exist. When you do play with an edge and a chip, like you're playing with an edge, and when you're on the edge, you might fall into some questionable things, and that's kind of part of it. But back to one of your original points, I do think two things can be true. You can be, I can coach a player, TJ, who's a joy to coach, and that same player can be very challenging to coach. Those two things can be true. I can be Republican in some of my views and Democrat in some of my views. Two things can be true. And so I think that's important. And context is king here. So I do think as leaders, we have an obligation, or coaches have an obligation to teach, and to teach the why behind the what, and have a conversation about it. I don't know that it's like a talking to, it's a talking with your players. Like it's a moving and a fluid thing. I don't think it's just black and white by any means.
Yeah. Just helping them to understand what are the consequences of your actions sometimes? What do your actions display to others? And do you want that displayed to others? I think really like these are a lot of talks that I think everyone should be having with their team, just to get to a place of clarity on helping them decide how they can show up and be the type of person they want to be, and how they can be the type of competitor they want to be. And that's where, I actually thankful as coaches, we get this opportunity to help them through this. I think it's a real blessing to be able to be the ones that help form and shape some of their decision making. And these are the types of decisions that are definitely being made at a young age for whatever reason. And it's a great opportunity for us to step in and coach.
Players, coaches, leaders listening, thank you so much. We appreciate you tuning in. As always, hit us up on Hardwood_hustle. Let us know your thoughts, your comments. Shoot us ideas, what we can talk about, what are some pain points, what we can do to better serve you. That is TJ, and I'm Sam, and we are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. Be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Hardwood_hustle to stay up to date on the latest episodes and share your thoughts with our coaching community. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.